Oh yeah, I forgot I could talk. How about twin? I have my system audio off.
It as
For
cold,
the stream.
mechanical,
I'm
and
gonna turn it
glitchy.
back on.
Instead of opening new doors,
Watching
it
this
feels
video
like
right
your
here.
entire brain has crashed. The imagery can be bizarre, almost alien. Reports include feeling like you're abducted, experimented on, or dissected by strange forces. Some describe being trapped in endless time loops where the same moment repeats over and over until they can't tell if they'll ever escape. A common theme is being buried alive in your own body, fully aware but unable to move or
No,
speak.
make me a
The
thumbnail.
brain is
I don't care if
active,
it's
but the
good or not.
body has
Just
been
make it
cut
chaotic.
out of the
Like, just
equation.
add literally
And while
whatever you
some
want,
people
just
frame
make
this
sure
as
that it's clear
mystical
that it's
or
me.
enlightenment,
I don't care if
just
you
as
add,
many
like,
describe it as absolute
you can do
terror.
literally
There's
whatever you
nothing
want for it.
playful
Just make
about
sure that
being convinced you're
you can
dead
tell
or
it's
that
for
you're
this
stuck in a
level.
void forever.
I'm verifying
It's
it,
not
that's a live
uncommon
stream,
for users to
and
come
it's
back
GG.
shaken, with the sense that
And that
they've
is
touched
green.
something they weren't supposed
Anything
to.
else,
The
you can do
K-hole
whatever
is
you
the
want.
clearest example of why ketamine is so different from other drugs. It isn't exactly
Or else
just
more like
change how
Charlie
you
Kirk.
feel, it pulls apart the entire structure of consciousness and leaves you stranded in the wreckage. It's not a doorway to higher meaning like LSD is often marketed. It's more like your brain glitching out, the operating system freezing, and reality
Bro, why am I
being
so bad
replaced
today?
with
I was
something
doing so much
broken
better
and
yesterday.
unrecognizable.
I'm
For
getting past this
some,
like every
that
few
brokenness
times.
feels liberating. For others, it's the most horrifying experience of their lives. Either way, the K-hole is where ketamine's science meets its darkest reputation. A space where identity and reality dissolve into cold, mechanical nothingness. One of the most unnerving parts of the K-hole is how unpredictable it feels. Two people can take the same dose and end up in completely different universes. For some, it's a slow slide, drifting further and further from their body. For others, it's like falling through a trap door. One second they're in a room with friends, and the second they're somewhere else entirely. The sensory distortions hit every part of the mind. Vision can fracture into sharp geometric grids or collapse into total darkness. Some describe it as watching reality stutter like a broken VHS tape, repeating frames out of order. Sounds get warped, voices stretch and echo, or cut out entirely, leaving people convinced they've gone deaf. The body itself stops feeling like a body. Limbs feel detached, oversized, or even missing. People talk about looking down and not recognizing their own hands. Then there's the paralysis. In the K-hole, many users find themselves unable to move at all. They can think, they can sometimes even hear what's happening around them, but their body won't respond. That mismatch creates a terrifying locked-in sensation, like again being buried inside your own skin. Some people compare it to anesthesia awareness, where patients wake up during surgery but can't signal to the doctors. It's a conscious nightmare. The way time breaks is another defining feature. Minutes can stretch into what feels like hours. Loops form where the same moment plays again and again, until the person isn't sure if they've been stuck there forever. In one account after another, people describe living through entire alternate lifetimes in just a few minutes of real-world time. When they finally come back, it leaves them shaken, sometimes with lingering doubts about whether their real life is just another layer of the hallucination. And unlike classic psychedelics, ketamine rarely delivers uplifting visions. LSD or psilocybin might give you a sense of cosmic unity, a feeling of being connected to nature, or a flood of colorful imagery. The K-hole, by contrast, feels sterile and alien and clinical. The spaces people describe are cold, metallic corridors, endless voids, or again, like operating tables where they're being dissected by beings they can't fully see. Now, the aftermath of a K-hole is just as disturbing. Some people come back exhilarated, convinced they've glimpsed hidden truths about reality. Others return traumatized, rattled by the sense that they were gone for years, dead and reborn or experimented on. Even among those who say they enjoyed it, there's often an edge of unease, as if they touched something that humans aren't supposed to touch. The K-hole also, it doesn't just scar on memory, it scars on identity. People sometimes struggle for days after, feeling unreal, detached, or anxious. The line between their normal life and the void they fell into can blur. And that lingering uncertainty, the thought that the world might glitch out again without warning, is part of what makes the K-hole so infamous. If the mental side of ketamine is disturbing, the physical side is just as brutal. Long-term heavy use doesn't just mess with your mind, it leaves permanent scars on the body. The most notorious effect is what is called the ketamine bladder. Doctors started noticing this in the early 2000s among people in Hong Kong and the UK who were using ketamine daily. The drug irritates and inflames the bladder lining, causing ulcers and scar tissue. Over time, the bladder shrinks and stiffens. The result? Constant pain, an urgent need to urinate every few minutes, and, in many cases, total incontinence. Some users have reported being unable to leave their house because they have to pee dozens of times an hour. Others end up in emergency rooms passing blood. In the worst cases, the bladder is damaged beyond repair and has to be surgically removed or bypassed with a catheter. Imagine starting out using ketamine for fun and ending up with a permanent tube just to pass urine. That's the level of damage we're talking about. And it's not just the bladder. Heavy use also strains the kidneys and liver since they're working overtime to process and clear the drug. Chronic ketamine users often show elevated liver enzymes and kidney dysfunction, warning signs that those organs are under serious stress. Then there's the brain itself. While ketamine is being studied for its potential antidepressant effects, frequent recreational use can lead to the opposite: rebound depression and memory problems. People report difficulty recalling basic information, trouble focusing, and an emotional flatness that gets worse the more they use. Instead of escaping reality, the drug leaves them stuck in a gray zone where their moods are lower than ever. What makes all of this more disturbing is how quickly it can set in. Some heavy users report bladder symptoms within just a few months of regular dosing. It's not a distant long-term risk, it's a rapid breakdown that sneaks up on people who think they're only dabbling. Ketamine doesn't cause the same kind of physical withdrawal as heroin or alcohol. You don't get the shakes, cold sweats, or seizures when you stop, but that doesn't mean it's safe. The danger with ketamine is psychological dependence. Because of the way it severs you from reality, ketamine can become an escape hatch people start relying on. Someone going through depression, trauma, or boredom might take it once to feel detached, and suddenly it becomes the one thing that makes them feel outside of their life. The pattern often turns into binge, people redosing over and over, chasing that feeling of weightlessness or detachment until days blur together. Instead of being physically hooked, they get trapped in the cycle of needing ketamine to feel anything at all. This kind of compulsive use is especially common in nightlife and party culture. In clubs or at raves, ketamine's short duration and powder form make it easy to re-up constantly. Users will snort bump after bump, thinking they're keeping the buzz alive, but before long, they're lost in the dissociation. The drug that was supposed to make the night more fun leaves them silent, collapsed in a corner, or carried out by friends. And that vulnerability opens the door to something even darker. In the 2000s, ketamine gained a reputation as a date rape drug. Like GHB and Ropanol, ketamine can knock someone into a state where they're conscious but unable to move or resist. They may not even remember what happened afterward because of the memory-blocking effects. Media reports about sexual assaults in clubs and house parties drove that label home, making ketamine almost synonymous with exploitation. And while that reputation sometimes got exaggerated by scare campaigns, the core danger was, and still is, very real. Behind the flashing lights of clubs and the casual party chatter, ketamine use often hides disturbing realities. People slumped in bathrooms, unable to stand, users too dissociated to say no, exploitation that thrives in those moments where someone is detached, paralyzed, or completely cut off from control of their own body. So while ketamine can be framed as a therapeutic tool in one context, in another it becomes a weapon, not just self-destructive through dependence, but used against people who never chose to take it. And that double life is what makes it one of the most unsettling drugs to ever circulate through party culture. While ketamine was showing up in clubs and raves, another group of people were exploring it in a completely different way. Not for fun, not for medicine, but as a tool to push the boundaries of consciousness. In the 1970s and 80s, a small circle of researchers, writers, and psychonauts became obsessed with ketamine's ability to break reality apart. To them, it wasn't just a drug, it was a gateway. They believed that by shutting down the brain's normal sense of self, ketamine opened doors into entirely new dimensions of thought. The most famous figure in this scene was John Lilly. Lilly was a neuroscientist best known for his bizarre dolphin communication experiments and his invention of the sensory deprivation tank. In the 70s, he started combining those float tanks with massive doses of ketamine, isolated in darkness and silence with his brain completely dissociated. Lilly claims he contacted alien intelligences. He wrote about entire conversations with beings he called Echo, the Earth Coincidence Control Office, and later a darker force he named Solid State Intelligence, which he believed was an artificial machine consciousness trying to control humanity. Lilly wasn't alone. Other experimenters at the time described traveling through strange geometric landscapes, communicating with entities, or accessing hidden layers of the mind. These stories gave ketamine a cult following among underground psychonauts, people who saw it not as a party drug but as a kind of chemical spaceship. Of course, from the outside, this all looked disturbing. Lilly was dosing himself with ketamine daily, often to the point of complete collapse. His alien experiences read less like revelations and more like symptoms of a mind that was breaking under the weight of constant chemical dissociation. But his writings spread, and they helped build the myth that ketamine wasn't just a drug, it was a key to something beyond ordinary human reality. Even today, traces of that cult fascination linger. Forums and niche communities still treat ketamine like a tool for exploring consciousness, citing Lilly's work or their own experiences in the K-hole as evidence that something out there is real. But whether you see it as contact with higher intelligence or just the brain glitching under chemical assault, this side of ketamine shows how deeply it can reshape the human experience. It's not just disturbing because of the damage it does, it's disturbing because of how far it can pull people away from consensus reality, and how willing some are to keep going back. Ketamine's story starts in the early 1960s. In 1962, chemist Calvin Stevens at Park Davis Laboratories first synthesized the compound while searching for a safer alternative to PCP. At the time, PCP was being tested as an anesthetic, but it had one major problem. Patients often woke up in terrifying states of psychosis. Stevens' new molecule, ketamine, seemed to solve that issue. It knocked people out quickly, wore off faster, and didn't leave them trapped in the same long, violent delusions. By the mid-60s, ketamine was approved for use in humans and animals, and within a few years, it was deployed on the battlefield. During the Vietnam War, ketamine became a staple for combat medics. It was praised as a battlefield anesthetic because it didn't suppress breathing the way other anesthetics did. Soldiers could be given ketamine in the middle of chaos, even while severely injured, and keep breathing on their own. It was cheap, portable, and reliable, and for many, it was literally life-saving. But ketamine's usefulness wasn't limited to humans. It was also widely adopted in veterinary medicine, especially for larger animals like horses. That practical use eventually gave it a nickname that would stick in popular culture: the horse tranquilizer. Media outlets in the 1980s and 90s loved to hammer that label, often ignoring that ketamine was equally common in human operating rooms. Still, the stigma fueled the image of ketamine as something crude, dangerous, and not meant for people. That image collided with a very different world in the 1980s and 90s, the underground rave and club scene. Ketamine powder started circulating at warehouse parties, music festivals, and nightclubs where it was snorted for its dreamy, dissociative high. It was cheap compared to cocaine or ecstasy, and dealers often sold it in the same environment, sometimes even mixing it into cocktails of drugs. Partygoers called it Special K, Vitamin K, or just K. At lower doses, it felt floaty, but at higher ones, people stumbled into the infamous K-hole, sometimes right there on the dance floor. By the end of the 90s, ketamine had lived multiple lives: a lab discovery, a battlefield medicine, a veterinary anesthetic, and a controversial party drug. That strange history set the stage for the paradox we're in today, where ketamine is once again being rebranded, not as a club drug, but as a billion-dollar mental health treatment. For decades, ketamine was seen as either a party drug or an oddball anesthetic. But in the early 2000s, researchers stumbled upon something shocking. When given at low doses, ketamine could relieve severe depression within hours. Unlike traditional antidepressants, which can take weeks to kick in, ketamine seemed to work almost immediately. Patients who had been suicidal one day sometimes reported feeling stable and even hopeful the next. That discovery changed everything. By the mid-2010s, ketamine had gone from being demonized as a rave drug to being hailed as a potential breakthrough treatment for mental illness. Ketamine infusion clinics began springing up across the US and abroad. These were private centers where patients could pay out of pocket, often hundreds to thousands of dollars per session, to sit in a chair, get an IV drip of ketamine, and ride out the dissociation under medical supervision. The boom was fast but also messy. Most of these clinics were cash-based and barely regulated. Insurance rarely covered the treatments, meaning only the desperate and the wealthy could afford them. And while some clinics were run by legitimate doctors, others operated more like boutique spas, advertising ketamine as a wonder drug without much oversight. The stories that came out were mixed. Some patients found incredible relief, while others were left financially drained, cycling through temporary highs followed by emotional crashes. Sensing a gold mine, Big Pharma stepped in. In 2019, Johnson & Johnson rolled out Spravato, a nasal spray made from S-ketamine, a slightly altered version of the ketamine molecule. The FDA approved it specifically for treatment-resistant depression. The price tag? Thousands of dollars per year. And because it was branded, patented, and FDA stamped, insurance companies were more willing to cover it compared to generic ketamine. The disturbing irony is that in the 90s, ketamine was vilified in the media as a dangerous club drug, associated with exploitation and psychosis. Now, the same substance, slightly repackaged and rebranded, was being sold back to the public as a miracle cure at a massive markup. Big Pharma had essentially taken a drug they once condemned and turned it into a billion-dollar business. For patients, the results can be life-changing, but the bigger picture raises unsettling questions. Is ketamine truly a breakthrough therapy, or just another example of corporations monetizing desperation? The answer may be both, which only makes the story of ketamine even stranger. Now I want to talk about E by Echo 2K, an album I love. I have never done ketamine before, but I fell in love with this album as it uses addiction to ketamine both as a plea for help and a lens through which to see depression and many themes. What makes E such a haunting album is how it doesn't just talk about ketamine addiction, it sounds like it. Echo 2K builds a sonic and lyrical soundscape that mirrors dissociation. Thin, translucent vocals that float like they're barely tethered to the beat, minimal production that leaves more empty space than resolution, and words that drift between confession, surreal imagery, and fragmented loops. The album becomes less of a collection of songs than a simulation of what ketamine actually does to the mind. It dissolves structure, slows time, and makes reality feel mechanical, dreamlike, and alien. Take the intro, AAA power line. The lyrics hit straight at the helplessness of dissociation. Backseat of some car, zip tied up, can't move my arms. That image of paralysis isn't abstract, it's the kind of bodily detachment K-hole users describe, being awake but unable to move. The repetition of lines over and over and over mirrors the looping thought patterns that ketamine creates, where a single phrase or feeling replays endlessly. Even the title, referencing a power line, suggests that he's carrying some invisible charge, maybe like that nervous system buzzing while the body itself won't respond. Echo's delivery, thin and chant-like, sounds less like singing and more like a transmission, as if he's not fully present but speaking from somewhere in between. Then there's Fragile, which takes the dissociation inward into the body and psyche. Lines like, wake up happy, wash my face in acid, I'm glassy, shattered, wrapped in bubble plastic, capture that uncanny mix of numbness and sensitivity that ketamine addiction creates. You feel untouchable and breakable at the same time. His metaphors, gasoline, kerosene, broken jaws, teeth cracking, aren't just about fragility, they're about self-destruction, hiding under gloss and surface shine. The Swedish outro, which means in English, breathe in, breathe out, follow the light, could be read as a kind of dissociative mantra, almost medical, like someone guiding him through sedation. The track embodies what ketamine does emotionally. It numbs pain pain while revealing how close you are to shattering underneath. Sugar and Diesel shifts focus to compulsion, the cycle of addiction itself. The chorus is brutally simple. More, got to have it. No more, I can't handle it. That push and pull is exactly how ketamine operates. The craving is immediate and overwhelming, but the come down is nauseating, depressive, and destabilizing. Contrast in the title, something sweet and consumable, sugar, versus something toxic and industrial, diesel, is addiction versus something toxic and industrial, diesel, is addiction in a nutshell. Echo frames drug use not as glamorous, but as embarrassing, even humiliating. He literally says, "Uh-oh, that's embarrassing. Oops, no, something happened. Someone please call an ambulance." That's the honesty of it. The moment when a high becomes a collapse, when you're no longer in control but still reaching for the bag. Across the album, these songs don't just name ketamine, they translate its mechanics into art. The looping structures mimic mental spirals, the airy detached vocals mimic dissociation, the lyrics drift between bodily paralysis, compulsive cycles, and the sense of unreality that follows heavy use. And the overall sound design, sparse, translucent, digital, evokes the sterile, mechanical coldness of a K-hole compared to the warmth of psychedelic highs. What makes E beautiful and disturbing at the same time is how it refuses to glamorize. It doesn't frame ketamine as enlightenment or escapism. Instead, it presents it as fragile, compulsive, alienating, but also achingly human. It's not a straight anti-drug statement, and it's not an endorsement. It's more intimate than either. It's the sound of someone caught in the middle, floating, cracked, and still reaching out. And really quick before we finish, I want to mention one more thing about ketamine that I find interesting. One of the strangest things about ketamine is how it's inspired a whole aesthetic around emptiness. Unlike psychedelics, which get tied to colorful visuals and nature and spirituality, ketamine's culture leans into imagery of blankness, empty rooms, glowing screens, sterile light. The experience of being cut off from your body and surroundings has bled into fashion, music, and online spaces, where ketamine is less about what you see and more about what disappears. In art and media, ketamine is often evoked with minimalist, washed-out visuals, pale faces, digital glitches, bodies floating in empty space. This reflects the void people describe during high doses, where everything familiar is stripped away until only fragments remain. Even the slang around ketamine, falling into the hole, entering the void, is all about absence rather than presence. And guys, that's the end of the ketamine video. Thank you for watching this far. I appreciate all of the support. Please leave a like and subscribe if you want to. It helps out a lot. Follow my Instagram if you want. Join the Discord so we can hang out. I talk in my Discord a lot. I love to talk to you guys. But yeah, good night, everyone. Sweet dreams. There's a reason the word mafia still makes people flinch. Behind every news story about drugs, missing journalists, or money that vanished offshore, there's usually an organized crime network holding the strings. These aren't just street gangs or movie villains. We're talking cartels that run countries, mobs that infiltrate governments, and syndicates so powerful entire wars have been fought over their profits. This is the organized crime iceberg. From the familiar faces of the mafia to the blood-soaked drug wars of Mexico. Let's learn about this. A few disclaimers, obviously I do not condone anything illegal. This is just an interesting thing to learn about. Also, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it, especially in the YouTube climate right now. I love you all for supporting me, and if you want to join my Discord so we can hang out, or follow my Instagram, both are in the description. Now, I'll stop yapping, okay? My fault. Let's get into this shit. We're gonna start in layer 1, starting with the mafia. When people hear the word organized crime, this is where their mind goes first. The mafia, or Cosa Nostra, started in Sicily as a kind of vigilante group protecting landowners, but it quickly evolved into a network network built on violence, loyalty, and money. By the early 1900s, Italian immigrants brought it to the US, turning it into one of the most powerful crime systems in history. Murder, racketeering, gambling, and extortion weren't just side hustles, they were the economy. For decades, the mafia controlled parts of New York, Chicago, and Las Vegas. Al Capone. Al Capone rose to power during Prohibition, when alcohol was banned across the United States and black market demand exploded. Operating out of Chicago, he built a system that supplied liquor through breweries, smuggling routes, and speakeasies protected by bribed police and city officials. His crew enforced control with shootings, bombings, and intimidation that left hundreds dead in gang wars throughout the 1920s. The most famous event was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929, where 7 members of a rival gang were executed in a North Side garage. For years, Capone lived openly, posing as a successful businessman and donating to charity to clean his image. But federal agents eventually caught him on tax evasion in 1931. He spent 7 years in prison before being released for health reasons, marking the collapse of Chicago's most insane crime empire. The Godfather movies. When The Godfather came out in 1972, it changed how people understood organized crime. Before that, the mafia was mostly seen as thugs and crooks in headlines. Coppola's film showed it as a hierarchy, though. Structured, disciplined, and rooted in family power. The story of the Corleones pulled directly from real mob history. The 5 families, Las Vegas expansion, and the shift from the street-level violence to corporate influence. It captured how organized crime really evolves, how violence becomes negotiation, and fear becomes reputation. Many real mobsters admired the film's accuracy and even copied the characters' behaviors in real life, quoting lines and holding meetings like scenes from the movie. The Yakuza. Japan's organized crime groups, known collectively as the Yakuza, have existed for centuries. Their roots trace back to gamblers and street peddlers in the 1600s who formed networks for protection and profit. Over time, they evolved into highly structured syndicates with bosses, enforcers, and soldiers, similar to a corporate chain of command. The largest, the Yamaguchi-gumi, operates across Japan and has tens of thousands of members. Unlike Western crime groups, the Yakuza build a public image of order. They've run offices, held press conferences, and even participated in disaster relief to maintain influence. Beneath that surface, they control construction, nightlife, gambling, and loan sharking, with extortion and blackmail as standard tools. Police crackdowns in the 2010s forced them underground, but their presence still shapes Japan's economy and politics through hidden business ties and intimidation that rarely reaches the news. Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel. Pablo Escobar turned cocaine into one of the most profitable commodities on earth. In the late 1970s and 80s, his Medellin cartel smuggled tons of cocaine from Colombia into the United States every month, using planes, boats, and entire private airstrips. At its peak, the cartel made hundreds of millions weekly, paying off politicians, police, and even building homes for the poor to keep local support. Escobar used terror to protect his empire. Bombings, assassinations, and kidnappings were routine. In Colombia, judges, journalists, and presidential candidates were murdered for resisting him. His war against the government left thousands dead and nearly collapsed parts of the state. When the US and Colombian forces finally cornered him in 1993, he was shot and killed on a Medellin rooftop. His death marked the fall of one cartel, but not the end of the cocaine trade. It only spread the power to smaller, more violent groups. El Chapo and the Sinaloa cartel. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman built the Sinaloa cartel into the most dominant drug organization in Mexico. His operations moved cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and later fentanyl into the United States using tunnels, cargo trucks, and entire fleets of aircraft. He became infamous for his corruption network, paying off police, military officers, and politicians to protect shipments and tip him off before raids. Violence was used strategically, enough to eliminate rivals, but never to draw too much attention to himself. What made El Chapo stand out was how he ran the cartel like a corporation, forming partnerships with other groups and controlling logistics from production to distribution. His 2 prison escapes turned him into a global headline, one hidden in a laundry cart in 2001, which is crazy, and another through one hidden in a laundry cart in 2001, which is crazy, and another through a mile-long tunnel in 2015. After his final capture in 2016 and extradition to the United States, the Mexican government splintered the organization, leading to years of infighting and bloodshed across Sinaloa. Money laundering. Money laundering is the set of methods criminals use to make illegal cash look legal so it can be spent without drawing attention. It breaks into three basic steps: placement, layering, and integration. And this is not an instructional how-to, by the way. I'm just explaining it because it's interesting to learn about how bad people do illegal things. But this is not instructions, and you should not do this. So placement is getting dirty cash into the financial system. Examples include depositing small amounts across many bank accounts, feeding cash into a busy cash business like a bar, club, or car wash, or buying casino chips and cashing out. Layering is about hiding the trail, moving the money through multiple accounts, shell companies, overseas banks, fake invoices, or complex wire transfers so the original source disappears. Integration is when the money comes back to the criminals as clean funds, buying real estate, luxury goods, or investing in a legitimate business so proceeds can be used openly. Common laundering tools include shell companies, trade-based schemes like fake import-export invoices, cash-heavy businesses like what they did in Breaking Bad, offshore trusts, and professional enablers like corrupt lawyers, Breaking Bad reference again, accountants, or bankers. Red flags that trigger investigations are repeated small cash deposits, odd business revenue that doesn't match activity, sudden purchases after a series of opaque transfers, and payments rooting through secrecy jurisdictions. Drug trafficking. Drug trafficking is the production, movement, and sale of illegal drugs. It funds a huge portion of organized crime's activity. It starts with cultivation or manufacture, like coca farms, poppy fields, synthetic cultivation or manufacture, like coca farms, poppy fields, synthetic labs. It moves through transportation networks, like hidden compartments, boats, tunnels, corrupt checkpoints, which if you want a whole video about that, I have a whole video about drug smuggling methods, so. And then it ends with distribution in consumer markets via street dealers or local networks. And then each stage creates opportunities for corruption. Growers pay local militias, smugglers bribe customs, and distributors pay off street cops. Different drugs follow different routes and structures. Cocaine historically flows from Andean producers through Central America into North America and Europe. Heroin often moves from Afghanistan along routes through Central Asia and the Balkans. Synthetic drugs can be produced close to the consumer market in mobile labs. This trade generates massive cash that must be laundered, and it shapes local economies, politics, and violence wherever the profits concentrate. The FBI's most wanted list. The FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list was created in 1950 to help the public identify and report dangerous criminals. It came from a newspaper article where a reporter asked the Bureau who their toughest fugitives were. The idea caught on, and the list became a permanent tool for publicity and pressure. Over the years, it's featured mob bosses, drug lords, terrorists, and serial killers. For organized crime, appearing on the list often meant the US government had finally prioritized taking someone down. People like James Whitney Bulger, a Boston crime boss who spent 16 years on the run, and Osama bin Laden both appeared on it. The list relies heavily on public cooperation. Tips, sightings, and even anonymous calls have led to hundreds of captures. RICO Act, which stands for Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. The RICO Act is a US law passed in 1970 that allows prosecutors to charge entire criminal organizations instead of only going after individuals for single crimes. Before RICO, mob leaders could avoid jail by keeping distance from direct criminal acts and letting lower members take the blame. Under RICO, if someone is a part of a group that commits a pattern of crimes, like extortion, fraud, or murder, they can be charged for their role in the organization itself. This law made it possible to convict high-ranking mafia bosses who ordered crimes but didn't personally carry them out. And it's still used today against gangs, cartels, and even corrupt corporations. Cosa Nostra. Cosa Nostra means our thing in Italian. It's the original name for the Sicilian Mafia, which began in the mid-1800s as a network of families controlling land, trade, and local protection rackets in Sicily. Over time, they spread to the United States through immigration, leading to what became known as the Italian-American Mafia. Triads. Triads are Chinese crime syndicates that trace their origins to secret societies formed in the 1600s, originally created to resist the Qing dynasty. Over centuries, these groups evolved into large-scale criminal networks involved in smuggling, extortion, human trafficking, counterfeiting, and drug distribution. Modern triads operate mainly in Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, and Chinatowns worldwide. Each triad has a hierarchy with numbered ranks and rituals for initiation, often involving loyalty oaths and codes of secrecy. They're known for blending business and crime, using legitimate companies as fronts for illegal activities. While Hong Kong's government cracked down heavily in the 1990s, many triads adapted by moving operations overseas and investing in global markets. Gangland Chicago. Chicago in the 1920s was basically a war zone disguised as a city. When Prohibition banned alcohol, gangs turned bootlegging into their main business. Streets were divided by territory. Capone's South Side outfit, the North Side gang, the Chicago outfit, and every block had someone collecting payments or running shipments. Machine gun shootouts were normal, and so many bodies dropped that newspapers started calling it Bloody Chicago. Politicians and cops were bought off to protect shipments or to look the other way, which made the city feel untouchable to law enforcement. Chicago's criminal structure, crews, territories, bosses, and enforcers, ended up becoming the model for other US cities. Even decades after Capone's fall, the outfit still ran casinos, labor unions, and city contracts quietly behind the scenes. Narcos. When Narcos dropped on Netflix, it also changed how people saw drug trade. The show followed Pablo Escobar and later other cartels, showing how government corruption, US involvement, and sheer greed turned Colombia into a battlefield. It mixed real footage with dramatization, so it felt like a documentary but hit like a thriller. The series showed how much of the world's economy was built on cocaine money. Planes, farms, politicians, and banks all tied into the same system. Pusha T. Pusha T built his whole image around the world of drug dealing without ever needing to glorify it. His lyrics are detailed, like someone who's seen every part of the business: the supply, the fear, the paranoia, and the money. He came up in the early 2000s with Clips, and their album Hell Hath No Fury was basically a soundtrack for the cocaine era. The production was cold and minimal, matching the subject matter perfectly. Over time, he turned coke rap into an art form, more about storytelling and precision than bragging. Even now, he's one of the few rappers who can talk about the drug trade in a way that feels grounded, not performative. And that's why his name still gets tied to the topic of organized crime and the economy built around it. And that was Layer 1, which is the stuff that everybody knows already pretty much. This iceberg is pretty big. That took a lot longer than I was expecting, but let's get into Layer 2, starting with the 5 families of New York. New York became the center of organized crime in America because of these 5 groups: Genovese, Gambino, Lucchese, Bonanno, and Colombo. They formed in the 1930s after years of violent mob wars between rival gangs. Each family had its own boss, underboss, and crew, running everything from gambling and loan sharking to labor unions and construction rackets. The Genovese family was known for being the most secretive, the Gambinos for their muscle, and the Lucchese family for their business operations. The Bonannos were known for getting mixed up in the drug trade, and the Colombos for constant internal fighting. Together, they basically ran New York's underworld for decades. They had deep ties with politicians, cops, and unions, and their control reached into Vegas casinos and even Hollywood. The FBI didn't fully break through until the 1980s, when wiretaps and informants started catching bosses on tape ordering hits and dividing money. Before that, the mob ran like its own government, taxing businesses, enforcing rules, and deciding who got to operate in their territory. The Commission. The Commission was created in 1931 by Lucky Luciano to stop mobsters from killing each other over territory. It worked like a board of directors for the mafia. The bosses of the 5 families and a few others around the country sat on it and met secretly to settle disputes, share profits, and approve major moves like assassinations or new bosses. It was a way to turn the mafia from scattered gangs into an organized national network. Meetings were rare and heavily guarded, but they controlled a lot of what happened in organized crime through the mid-20th century. When the FBI finally exposed the Commission in the 1980s during the Commission case, it was a huge deal. It proved that the mafia really did have a national leadership structure and wasn't just a loose group of street gangs. Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky. Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky were the 2 guys who basically turned organized crime into a modern business. Luciano came up through the brutal world of Prohibition-era New York, and Lansky was his lifelong friend and financial brain. Together, they helped form the National Crime Syndicate, which linked Italian, Jewish, and Irish mobsters across the US. Luciano handled the violence and leadership, and Lansky handled the money. Lansky figured out how to invest mob cash into real businesses, especially casinos in Cuba and later Las Vegas. Luciano again created the five-family system and the commission to help keep everything organized and prevent chaos. The American-Italian mafia's decline in the 1990s. By the 1990s, the mafia was falling apart. Decades of undercover work, informants, and federal RICO cases had sent dozens of bosses to prison. Surveillance got better, financial tracking laws got tighter, and violence started drawing too much heat. Younger guys didn't want to risk life sentences for old-school loyalty anymore. At the same time, new kinds of crime were taking over. Drug cartels, cybercrime, and white-collar fraud made more money with less blood. The old mafia's influence in unions, construction, and city contracts also weakened as the government cleaned up corruption. By the late 90s, most families still existed, but had nowhere near the power they once did. They went from running entire cities to running smaller local scams just to stay alive. The real golden era of the American mob was over. The Russian Bratva. After the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 1990s, Russia basically turned into the Wild West. The government was weak, the economy was wrecked, and almost everything, from oil to weapons, was up for grabs. That's when the Bratva, which literally means brotherhood, exploded. They weren't one single group, more like dozens of semi-independent gangs across Russia and Eastern Europe. The most powerful were the Solzhenitsyn Bratva out of Moscow and the Tambovskaya from St. Petersburg. These guys weren't street thugs, they ran with ex-KGB agents, businessmen, and politicians. They took control of banks, oil companies, and shipping routes, mixing legitimate business with organized crime. Extortion, contract killings, and smuggling were normal, but their real power came from money laundering and political protection. Some of them moved operations overseas, to Europe, Israel, and the US, using shell companies and fake exports to hide profits. The Bratva became one of the richest criminal networks on the planet, and because so many members have ties to government or intelligence, they're almost impossible to root out. The Ndrangheta. The Ndrangheta started in Calabria, the southern tip of Italy, and quickly grew into the most powerful mafia group in Europe. Unlike the flashy Sicilian mafia, they kept things tight and family-based. Literally, every clan is built around blood relatives, which makes it extremely hard for outsiders to infiltrate. For years, they were seen as small-time kidnappers and smugglers, but when cocaine trafficking exploded in the 1980s, they made direct deals with the Colombian cartels. That move made them into billionaires. Now they control most of Europe's cocaine supply and launder money through construction, hotels, and real estate all over the world. What makes them so hard to stop is how quiet they are. No big public hits, no flashy violence. They blend into society, run legitimate businesses, and keep loyalty through family bonds instead of hierarchy. Italy's anti-mafia forces have called them the most dangerous criminal group in Europe, even more than the Sicilian mafia ever was. The Camorra. The Camorra comes from Naples and is one of the oldest criminal groups in Italy, dating back to the 1800s. They're different from the Ndrangheta and the Sicilian mafia because they don't have one central leadership. Instead, Naples is divided into dozens of small clans that constantly fight each other for control. This makes them chaotic, but also harder to destroy. When one boss goes down, another just fills that space. They control rackets like waste management, construction, smuggling, and counterfeit goods, and they've been deeply tied to Naples' local politics for decades. The city's black market economy basically runs alongside the legal one. Their wars in the 2000s got so bad that people compared Naples to a war zone, with shootouts happening daily. Books and movies like Gomorrah exposed their operations to the world. The Sicilian Cosa Nostra Wars. In the 1980s, the Sicilian mafia tore itself apart. For decades, it had operated quietly under strict rules. No public violence, no unnecessary attention. Then came the Corleonesi faction, led by Salvatore Toto Riina. They decided to take over the entire organization through pure terror. Riina's men murdered rival bosses, judges, cops, and even civilians. Hundreds of people were killed, including anti-mafia prosecutors Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino. who were blown up by car bombs in 1992. Those assassinations shocked Italy and forced the government to fight back hard. Thousands of mobsters were arrested in the Maxi trial, and the state finally started dismantling the mafia's power. Reno was captured in 1993, and the old Cosa Nostra never fully recovered. The war marked the end of the mafia's total control over Sicily, but the violence it unleashed left scars that still shape Italian politics and law enforcement today. The Yamaguchi Gumi. The Yamaguchi Gumi is the biggest Yakuza organization in Japan and one of the biggest criminal groups in the world. It started in Kobe in 1915 as a labor union for dock workers, but over the decades it grew into a full-blown crime syndicate with tens of thousands of members. They deal in gambling, construction kickbacks, loan sharking, and corporate extortion. Stuff that looks more like business than street crime. For years, the Yamaguchi Gumi operated openly. They had office buildings, business cards, and even put on charity drives after earthquakes to look respectable. The Japanese government eventually cracked down hard, especially after the 1990s when violence between rival Yakuza groups spilled into public. That forced them underground, but they still exist in a quieter form. They've adapted by using shell companies, stock manipulation, and cybercrime. Even now it's common for Japanese companies to quietly pay protection money to avoid problems, which shows how much control they still have despite all the laws meant to stop them. MS-13. MS-13 started in Los Angeles in the 1980s, built by Salvadoran immigrants who had fled their country's civil war. At first, it was just a neighborhood gang formed for protection against other groups, but it quickly became violent and heavily involved in drugs, extortion, and murder. When the US began deporting gang members back to Central America, they brought the gang culture with them, and MS-13 spread across El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. It turned into one of the most feared organizations in the region, with thousands of members across both Central and North America. Their methods are brutal. Public executions, machete killings, and intimidation campaigns that make entire neighborhoods afraid to talk to police. What makes them hard to fight is that they're decentralized. Each clique runs its own area and answers only loosely to leadership. US law enforcement now treats MS-13 as an international criminal enterprise, but in Central America they've become so tied into politics and local corruption that they're like the line between the government and the gang blurs. Hell's Angel MC and outlaw biker gangs. The Hell's Angel Motorcycle Club began in California in 1948 and became the most notorious biker gang in the world. It started as a group of World War II veterans who loved bikes and chaos, but by the 1960s it had turned into a massive criminal network. The Angels and other clubs like the Outlaws, Bandidos, and Mongols controlled large parts of the drug trade, especially methamphetamine. They also deal in weapon smuggling, prostitution, and extortion. Despite that, they keep a public image of being just a motorcycle club, hosting charity rides and cookouts while quietly
Should be a lot better on a call. I don't know what to comment on. Whoa! Wait, I can beat Moros like this. Oh. Wait. Keep going till I can't get anywhere with this. What is this smart? What is this start position? What is this start position, bro? Wow, cool start position. What? Bro, I'll go to bed in What the freak is this? Wait, I wanna do some of these parts. Oh, I did the straight fly. I did the straight fly. There you go, did that. World's most impossible timing. I feel like I could do that wave. Wait. Wait, I can do that. Just 4 clicks. The last wave in Chernobyl's harder than this one. I know the wave before the very last one, like the long one. I'm trying to do parts that are actually possible, bro. This part's possible. I just side read that. not put any... What the frick do you do to that wave? Is this even freaking possible? So you have to go down slightly, then go up to get momentum at the right angle. Wait. Wait. I could do that. I could get this wave done in a day probably if I wanted to. Yeah, I could do that. Wait. Bro, what the freak is this yellow portal? Goofy yellow portal. Bro. Make me a wave challenge. Church of Christ. What is this? You stole my crystal meth crosses. Okay, this is a challenge I'm a beat. Wait. Oh, I'm not beating that. It's a whole level. I thought it was... Yeah, did you just copy and paste it from crystal meth? Did you see that? I just sight read that. Oh boy, I remember this one. Bro, it's not even possible. Oh, 23 first try? Wait, I can beat this. Bro, what are these buffs? You just remove one of the platforms? Just one of them. Why is it only possible sometimes? It's only sometimes possible. Oh yeah, good point. Do 976 instead. Nerf straight fly. What is this? Why does it only sometimes do it? Wait. Wait. I'm not beating all that. Nice timing. Why is it just a green orb? Why is it just a singular green orb? dad's gonna get mad at me.